interviewing Milton L. Goldberg on December 12th. No. December 12th? Yeah.
Yeah.
1994. Mel, I'm happy to be able to interview you today. I want to start with finding out from you, have you been the subject of other interviews on the subject we're discussing today or related subjects?
Well, Ben, before we get into the depth of this oral history, I think this is kind of a reversal of positions. About 50 years ago, there more or less, I interviewed you just as you were a young graduate social worker that came from the East for a job with the Jewish Big Brothers Association. So now here you are, 50 years later, interviewing me for this oral history.
That's right.
So we've had an interesting association over the years, and I'm delighted that you're the one who's actually doing the interview.
Good.
In regard to your question, no, I've not had any other interviews in this area before.
Okay. What circumstances led you into social work as a profession, Melt? Tell us a little bit about how you decided to go into this profession.
Well, I had to be careful not to get into a long-winded answer to a very simple question, but in many ways it is long-winded. It starts really way back when I was a young Boy Scout living in Boyle Heights. While I went to UCLA, I was a scoutmaster of a troop at the Soto, Michigan Center, and who incidentally the executive director of the Soto, Michigan Center at that time was Charles Shotland, of great fame both in the Jewish community and state and national community in social work, as well as the international community. Right. And so while I was going to school, I was a scoutmaster, and the social workers in the Jewish community kept sending to me kids who were in their caseload who needed special attention, almost like a casework approach, to be Boy Scouts. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got an experience of working with children with problems and also in scouting, and I kind of had a feeling that this was the easiest thing to me to be doing. Now, on the contrary, my father wanted me to be a lawyer because I have three cousins who were lawyers, the Rosenthal family, members of the State Assembly, and subsequently judges. I wasn't exactly sure I wanted to be a lawyer, but being a faithful son, I kind of went to as a political science major. But underneath the table, I was taking a lot of courses related to social work and the like. And out of that experience, when it came time to decide what graduate school to go to, law school, School of Education, or the Graduate School of Social Work, I just chose to go to the Graduate School of Social Work. Having had all these experiences working with a lot of other social workers at the Jewish Community Center, I also had the feeling that I wanted to make a career of working with children. I had visions of being a juvenile court judge someday or something like that. So that's really how I got into the business of really going into the Graduate School of Social Work. And I went to Berkeley, and then thereafter spent the last 55 years really in working with 3 different social work agencies in the Los Angeles community.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, it was a long answer.
That's all right. That's fine. That's fine. And interesting. Your father would have been happy if you had become a judge, yeah. I'm sure.
Right.
But
he was trying to keep up with the Joneses. The Joneses were the Rosenthal family.
Right. All right, will you tell us more about the positions you held in social work?
In the Graduate School of Social Work, the recommendation at that time was that the first job you get should be in a family service agency to get a kind of a broad family service experience. Mm-hmm. And so when I came down, I originally wanted to work with children. And so I first went and made application to Vista Del Mar and was interviewed by Joe Bonaparte. And at that very time, there just were no vacancies at Vista Del Mar, so I took my second best shot and was interviewed to work as a worker at the Jewish Family Service with Frida Moore, the executive director, who was the mother of all social workers in the Los Angeles area. Right. It was interesting because I was the first male to work in the agency. I think I was the first person with a graduate degree in social work. So I went to work. They gave me the job of being the intake worker. Most of the people I saw at that time were homeless men who had been traveling across the country on boxcars, the Jewish men on boxcars. And what would happen is they'd get off at the railroad station, and then they knew where to come to get some help. So they came to the Jewish Family Service, and then we kind of gave them $2 and sent them up to what was the original homeless men's service called, I don't know exactly how to spell it, but I know how to pronounce it, Ochus Norcham, which is a place for homeless men. And we'd send them there, and they'd give them help for a limited amount of time. So the Jewish Family Service was my first experience, and it was a good experience, but it didn't last very long because other things happened, which I'll be glad to relate to at another time. But that's how I started. That's where I started.
And next?
Well, and then I was very active in the Boy Scouts, as I said before, and I got to know Charles Schottland very well. And Charles Schottland became the executive director of the Federation of Jewish Welfare Organizations. And at that time, I had just gone to the World Scout Jamboree in Holland, and when I came back and was going down the platform of the ship, they didn't have airplanes in those days, there was a telegram for me. And the telegram, I thought the telegram was from my father. I had run out of money and I wanted to go to see the Rockettes and some things like that in New York, and I'd been in touch with him, and I asked him to send me money. And I thought that was a check from my dad to go do that, but apparently it wasn't. It was a telegram from the Los Angeles Council Boy Scouts of America. They asked me if I would just stay in New York, not come home, and go to the National Boy Scout Training Center for Executive Directors, staff people, at the Ship Reservation in New Jersey. I wasn't too enthusiastic about this because I had not intended to be a professional in Boy Scouting, although I'd spent my whole life with them and as a volunteer. That was not my interest at the time. So I kind of called Mr. Schottland on the phone, since he was the one who was managing this, and explained that I couldn't make that decision, would have to come home. Now Charles, the reason that Charles was involved in this was that the Los Angeles Council of the Boy Scouts were having a hard time financing themselves. They were a United Way agency, and United Way had taken a nosedive, and so the chairman of the board of the Boy Scouts came upon a unique way of getting some additional staff. He went to the Jewish community and to a man named Mendel Silberberg of the Jewish Community Relations Committee and asked if the Jewish community would finance the salary of one Jewish young man to be a social worker working for the Boy Scouts. He also went to the Catholic group to get the Catholics do that. The Jewish community at that time and the Jewish Community Relations Committee were very much interested in the whole problem of integrating, not assimilation, but integrating the Jewish community into the overall community. They saw this as a good opportunity to get a Jewish young man on the staff of the Boy Scouts to do a job. And so after about 3 or 4 months of saying no, I finally was convinced by the Jewish community itself, and Charles Schottland, that this is an important contribution to make into the community, and that I was the person who had all the qualifications and training experience for this job. I finally agreed to take the job, with one stipulation. I was not going to be a Jewish Scout executive. I was going to be a Boy Scout executive with the regular responsibilities, and I could on the side try to motivate the Jewish sponsorship of scout troops and get Jewish boys to be Boy Scouts. And that was agreed upon, and so I was drafted for that job, and that was a good decision at that time.
Does that mean you went to New York?
Oh, then I went to New Jersey, the Mortimer Schiff reservation, for a 1 month training course, which, by the way, was the best training I've ever had in social work, because it was kind of down the practical level of the learning by doing process that the Boy Scouts were great on. And national staff members of the Boy Scout came as faculty, and we went through everything: budgeting, finance, administration, the Boy Scout trip and all, which I had not gotten in my graduate work in social work. We never got much in the way of administration. And so these skills were very important for me. It was 30 days and 30 nights living in the place. And so I went to work for the Boy Scouts.
Well, you worked in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles.
Yeah. Would you like to know what my responsibilities were?
Okay. All right.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, that's fine.
Again, I had the unique responsibility of being the first Jewish young man to work for the Boy Scouts of America as a professional in the whole country. They had one rabbi in New York City who kind of worked with some of the synagogues. So that was kind of a beginning experience for the Boy Scouts of America, especially the Los Angeles Council. Because I had the social work training and social work background, they assigned the whole sort of central district, the whole area, the urban area, to me. They only had 5 executives, so I had 1/5 of the county of Los Angeles. And so we tried to do whatever we could to bring scouting to most of the ethnic minorities, to the black community. They had a district called the Watts-Willowbrook District, and to the Mexican-American community, which is out in the Boyle Heights area. That was my job, and I enjoyed that. That was kind of, it fulfilled my mission and feeling about the importance of bringing scouting to these kinds of kids. And one of the first things I did, which again was a wonderful experience, I employed, working for me, a wonderful Hispanic young man, a Mexican young man named Juan Acevedo, who I had known as a scout. We were scouts together. And he was the first Hispanic to ever work for the Boy Scouts of America. And his job was to go out to the Hispanic community and get the Hispanic churches and the Hispanic institutions to sponsor the Boy Scout movement. I also employed the first black man, African-American as they call him now, to work for the Boy Scouts of America in Los Angeles. A man named Roger Willis, who was a former minister. And his job was to go out into the black community and get all the black churches and all the black institutions and schools and like to sponsor scout troops.
Okay.
I also became aware of the fact that we had to involve the ethnic minority volunteer leaders and people also into our professional service. So I later became director of camping for the Boy Scouts of America and was responsible for administering 4 camps. One of the camps, was the first camp, was Camp Arthur Letts. It was originally donated many years ago by the president of the Broadway department store. I'm sorry. This isn't running. Later on, I was promoted to be the assistant scout executive, which included being the director of camping. And the Los Angeles Area Council had 4 camps. The oldest camp, and the one closest in town, was Camp Arthur Letts, named after the man who contributed the camp property. It was in the Hollywood Hills, and Arthur Letts was the president of the board of the Boy Scouts for a period, as well as being president of the Broadway department store. The camp was pretty much in an area where most of the campers from nearby districts were white, middle-class children. And we felt that it was time that to employ a sort of summer camp director. And there was an African-American man, his name was Mr. Hines, who was a very outstanding scoutmaster, a scout troop in a local school. He happened to be the janitor of the school, but he was a very good camping person, knew a lot about camping, had a lot of good experience. So we appointed him to be that summer, the camp director of Camp Arthur Les. And there were some reservations about that on the part of some people, but it worked out very well. He succeeded, and he became accepted by all the people at the camp. So that's my early history of working with the Boy Scouts of America. The one thing that happened while I worked with the Boy Scouts was that since the Boy Scouts was a United Way agency, and the Jewish and the Boy Scouts were funded by the United Way, we identified ourselves very much with the United Way and with the Welfare Planning Council. The Welfare Planning Council, as it's called, was the arm of the United Way. And the Planning Council was organized by divisions, the agencies who had like functions met together. So they organized a group work division. And so I was a part of the group work division and had a chance there to participate with the fellow group work executives, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, campfires, the Federation of Churches, and the Federation of Settlements and Centers, and all other groups. We became very close, and we helped each other a great deal. Out of this came an experience where the county of Los Angeles was beginning to have Mexican gang problems way back around 1940. And so Chief Probation Officer Carl Holton organized a gang prevention committee, which included him, which included Dr. McKibben of all nations, included the Captain Ben Stein, who was in charge of the juvenile police department, to try to work on attacking this problem. The police chief, the Lieutenant Ben Stein, his solution was to arrest the leaders of each of the gangs. The rest of us had another approach, and that was to do something about providing group work experiences for the younger brothers of the gang members, hoping to, in the long run, prevent the whole thing from spreading and growing. And then, in order to implement that, we organized an agency under the Welfare Planning Council called the Special Service for Groups. That agency was funded by the United Way, and its major function was to work with gangs and organizations like that, so that that we took those kids to camp. We did a variety of things. But unfortunately, if we read the newspapers now, we can see that from those small beginnings, the gang problem has already gotten out of hand. It's a major problem in this county of Los Angeles. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent in all kinds of areas. And again, unfortunately, because of poverty, because of drugs, and because of guns, this is a situation that's gotten out of hand. So it's kind of interesting to reflect upon the current situation and remember the beginnings of this thing way back then. I also had an experience that was of interest, and that grew out of my work with Carl Holton, the Chief Probation Officer. Governor Warren appointed a governor's advisory committee on children and youth. And I was nominated to be a member of that, I'm sure, by Carl Holton because of our association. And I was on that for several years. Our major function was to see what we can do to improve on the juvenile justice system, which we did. improve on the matter of incarceration of juveniles, which we did. We established with the California Youth Authority, taking young people out of prisons and county jails and putting them in a more appropriate setting. And then, in general, to work on deterring a juvenile crime. This was a great experience. And I developed an appreciation of the possibility that when you have smart, professional, public agency leadership with volunteer involvement, that the government can do a lot of good things. So I learned to really appreciate government participation, since I had spent my whole career up to this point in working for nonprofit agencies where volunteers were the major focus, the major way of getting things done.
Well, it's interesting, though, that you spent how many years with Boy Scouts?
7 years.
7 years. And, you know, in your telling, it sounds as if you had a social work position. And I don't think that the community, the social work community, sees the Boy Scouts as, you know, part of the field of social work. And yet, your experience may be guided by the fact that you had the educational background, and that's where you came from. Do you want to talk a little bit about the relationship between social work and Boy Scouts?
Well, that's true. I was, as I said earlier, I had this unique experience of being the only person at that time who was a social work trained person, a professional social worker, who came to work for the Boy Scouts of America, who we think of primarily in terms of volunteer scout leaders, and the professionals are not social work oriented, but are basically organization oriented. They learn how to do a couple of things that are important to every organization. They learn how to make sure they go out and market and try to get many kids and sponsoring institutions to be scouts, and they go out and raise as much money as they can to make it possible to hire staff. That gets to be their orientation. And then their basic philosophy is the philosophy of the Boy Scout movement, which goes way back to Baden-Powell, who founded it in 1910. But I also, having had a personal experience, much of my life's experience was shaped because of my experience as a Boy Scout in Boyle Heights, the East Side, in an integrated troop. By the way, that's interesting. Had a lot to do with what I was doing. I had an experience for a young Jewish boy living in Boyle Heights who had an Orthodox family and, you know, and grew up very much in a community that was all Jewish kids, all Jewish people. And I had the experience of being in a scout troop called Troop 182. It was sponsored by the Euclid Methodist Church. It was out near Whittier Boulevard on the edge of the Boyle Heights, because the Rosenthal family, where we came to live with, lived out there. They had the business out there. Father had a little tailor shop and so on and so forth. And so I got into that school, Euclid Avenue School, which is not a school which is just full of Jewish kids. I was one of the few Jewish kids. And I got into the scout troop. Now, the scout troop is where I learned about this business of integration. I belonged to a patrol. Boy Scouts are organized in patrol, the 8 kids patrol. I belonged to a patrol that had a Mexican boy in it, had a black boy in it, had a Japanese boy in it, had me in it, and had 4 Anglos. And we lived together, we camped together, we did everything together. And so the whole world to me was that kind of a world. And it influenced my thinking about a lot of things that I did the rest of my life. It's strange, but you know how those things happen.
Sure. Okay, now, where did you go from Boy Scouts? What was your next?
I'd been working with the Boy Scouts for about 8 years, and I'd been elevated to being assistant scout executive. That's like the number 2 job. And the executive director was a very fine man named Eddie Groot, and the assistant, the man right under him, all named Don Moreau. They were very good people. They were very nice to me. they gave me all the opportunities to do the untraditional thing in the Boy Scouts because of my social work background. They appreciated it. I had very little supervision. I was allowed to do whatever I want to do. Professionally, that's always a nice kind of job to have, you know. And so I became very devoted to the Boy Scout movement and the Boy Scout profession. I could have spent the rest of my life doing that and enjoying it. I really found it very worthwhile. But at a certain point, I'd gone about as far as I could in the local council. And the Boy Scout movement has a personnel policy that says somebody within the local council cannot become the executive director. That's an interesting policy. But in order to progress in the Boy Scout movement, you have to leave this council, go to another council, and then, you know, move from place to place to place. I and my family, we had our roots here in Los Angeles. And I did not want to go through that route of 2 years here, 2 years there. Didn't want to expose my family. My children were coming along to that. So then I had an early experience and an early connection with the Jewish Big Brothers in a strange kind of way. I was a camp counselor at Camp Sewanas at Brightwood when the Jewish Big Brothers and some of their staff brought about 10 kids up to camp for a week at the camp where I was working as a counselor. I was just a young kid. And I kind of looked after those 10 kids, sort of, and, because they were Jewish kids and I was Jewish. And so I made some connections with some of the staff people who were the part-time social workers of the Jewish Big Brothers. They didn't have full-time people. And then later on, I worked with another camp. They rented the Council of Jewish Women's Camp, Camp El Nido up in the Hollywood Hills. They rented that and run a camp one summer. And I was kind of employed by the Jewish Big Brothers while I was still going to college in summertime as like the program director. And then when I went to work for the Boy Scouts, the first 2 years of the operation of Camp Max Straus, I was the camp director of Camp Max Straus on leave from the Boy Scout because Charles Shotland and people, they knew about that, so they brought me over. Another thing that happened was that I was a member of the camp committee of the Jewish Big Brothers before they opened Camp Max Straus. I was on the search committee to go out and find a camp and so and help establish it. So I got deeply involved through the camping business and through the Boy Scouts with the Jewish Big Brothers. So at the point where I was having questions about whether I should continue my career in the Boy Scouts, the Jewish Big Brothers president, Leonard Chudikoff at the time, they had just opened the camp, and the camp got to be more than my predecessor, a very nice lady, was a volunteer sort of society lady, had no professional background training, but did a good job as an executive of but the camp was too much for her, she couldn't handle it. And so the board decided they wanted to go out and find a new executive. And so they came to me and asked me if I would do it. And I said no. I wasn't really, I was a little bit leery because of the experiences I had in the Jewish Family Service. I was a little bit leery of working for a sectarian agency. To be very honest and frank about that. But then, after a while, I considered the fact that here was an agency that had three things that I liked a great deal and had a lot of experience with. It had a volunteer organization, and I'm accustomed to volunteers with scout leaders and so on and so forth. It had a camp, and it also had a professional social work component, with the possibility of professional social component. And this is part of my experience and part of my training. So I finally decided that I would accept that. Very reluctantly. I hated to leave the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts were very upset about it. But I did that, and I came over and joined as the executive director of the Jewish Big Brothers in Camp Max Straus.
You stayed there for the rest of your career, right?
I stayed there from 1945 until 1986. And then for 4 or 5 years after that, I was kind of as a consultant to the Camp Max Straus Foundation, which is an endowment fund that we had set up many years ago to fund Jewish Big Brothers and Camp Max Straus. with what we call a rainy day fund. I'll talk about that later. So that's how I really got to the Jewish Big Brothers.
Well, Milt, it's interesting that I started working for Jewish Big Brothers in 1947, and you started in 1945. And when I started, you seemed like such a, what's the word I want? It seemed to me as if you had been there forever. This was a place that you had established yourself, and it was just 2 years. It's hard to believe that, Milt. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but well, Milt, tell me a little bit about, what you found at Jewish Big Brothers, what happened during your reign at the agency, how did it change, what kind of problems did you encounter in trying to achieve your goals? Can you do that a little bit now, Milt?
All right. When I came to the Jewish Big Brothers, it was sort of like an amateur organization. Very good work with their volunteer Big Brother program, and they had just opened up their camp. But having come from a professional background, I approached the agency as a professional person. A professional person is oriented to casework, oriented to group work, and oriented to the administration of agencies, like I'd learned at the Boy Scouts. So I was kind of putting to good use all of my academic training, my professional experience, my Boy Scout experience, working with boards, volunteers, fundraising, public relations, and the like. And one of the first things I recognized that I had to do was to put together a professional staff. They had one social worker, a person who did not have a degree in social work, and I pretty much had to let him go. And I started recruiting staff with MSWs. And historically, there's never been a person working with the Jewish Big Brothers who did not have an MSW. One of the first workers I employed was named Mo Belkin, who himself had just come from the East and had come out of the Graduate School of Social Work. Then I hired another young man who came from, I think, USC, who had a degree in social work, a man named Henry Weiner. And then the third person I hired, he was social work a little later, when we had the fun, was a young man named Ben Cohen, who had just come out of the Graduate School of Social Work. So one of the major contributions made at the very beginning was setting up the policy that only MSWs would be employed at the agency. This was quite a revolution because, as a Big Brother agency, all the other Big Brother agencies in America, none of them employed as their workers MSWs. They took on former school teachers, former county welfare workers, former Big Brothers and the like. That also kind of changed our relationship very much with the Big Brothers of America, because we had this unique situation, but on the other hand, we had to be careful that it did not alienate us from them, and so we had to be very circumspect about how we participated, because this was not the pattern that necessarily had to be followed by all Big Brother agencies in the country. Then we then came around to the next big idea, was that we wanted to have a clinical social work core base of service, and get out of the business of just having a volunteer Big Brothers only and just signing a Big Brother and just doing assigning people and doing nothing else about it. So we involved in getting a director of the volunteer Big Brother service. Ben Cohen was the first director. We built a strong volunteer committee of board members for that service. And then we organized, with the help of a very interesting gentleman, Dr. Oscar Reiss. Oscar Reiss was the pediatrician for all first Jewish families in Los Angeles, but he had a bent towards pediatricians being educated and trained in the field of mental health, and approaching not just the physiological problems of children, but approaching them with their psychological problems. I called upon him and knew that he had the status with our own board that whatever he said would go. I had developed the technique already of knowing that as a professional I had to be very careful about these new and very outgoing, outreaching approaches to social work in the agency. So I was able to find key board members and key volunteers in the community who could carry the ball for me. That was my way of doing it. And so we organized the Parent-Child Counseling Service. And that with a group of MSWs. The idea being that all of the services the agency developed, we developed 3 services: volunteer big brother service, native professional service, and all that. I'll talk later about Camp Max Straus. And then we developed the Parent-Child Counseling Service. A child and the family, and this is family-oriented. We were pioneers in the family-oriented treatment idea. We did not believe in treating children alone, which was the methodology of the child guidance clinic approach. But we believed in treating the mother and the boy simultaneously, because so many of our families were fatherless families. And so every client that came to our agency, whether they came for a camp, they came for volunteer Big Brothers, or the Parent-Child Guidance Service, got the benefit of intake and case clinical social work on the part of professional clinical social workers. They were the core that underlay all of the 3 services. Now that was unique.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, Mel. You mentioned that you have the boy and his mother. What about the father, if there was a father?
If there was a father, it's a good question. And quite often we dealt with, we also dealt with families that were not fatherless. If there was a father, we then brought the whole family in, the mother and the father and the boy, and the social workers dealt with them on this interview, with these clinical interviews. Now, we also did something that was rather interesting administratively. Most agencies develop their statistics in terms of clients they serve, in terms of the number of clients that they serve. I, being sort of goal-oriented, changed our statistics in terms of interview count. We reported how many interviews each caseworker had, and we focused upon the weekly interview, an intensive kind of treatment, an intensive kind of work with all of the members of the family. And so we then developed a program that if there was a father in the family, and this again was a unique approach, if there was a father in the family, he had to come in to the interview with the mother and the child, or we would not see them. Now this was a very unique thing because historically, up to that point, in all social agencies in America, the mother was the one that came to the social agency with the child. The fathers never involved themselves. So we developed techniques for involving the fathers and treating the fathers, and that always moved things along much faster. Again, those are pioneer efforts. Pioneer efforts.
Very good. Now, what kind of obstacles did you find when you tried to introduce new ideas? How did you deal with them?
Here I was really focusing on professional outcomes. I was measuring always how many people we served and how well did we serve them. There are other people, especially some board people, especially. They got interested, as many of them are, because many of them are businessmen. They got interested in the numbers game. They always want to know how many this, how many that, and they're concerned with numbers. Like to them, the bottom line was, how many little brothers you have, how many kids in counseling, or how many kids went to camp, and I was focusing on numbers. True, because I was a very pragmatic, practical person, but I was also focusing on the quality of our service. But that was always a hard thing to get across and to get acceptance and get lay people to go along. For example, in the volunteer Big Brother program, I had insisted that just as we see and supervise the families, that we give very close supervision to the volunteer Big Brothers. We see volunteer Big Brothers as if they were clients and help them do their job in a very almost professional way. Now there was a lot of resistance to that because traditionally, and also in the whole national Big Brother movement, they didn't bother with that. They just said, well, you're the Big Brother and you're the boy, get going and whatever happens to come. And maybe once a year we'll discover whether or not you still are the Big Brother. But we knew each month whether this Big Brother was active, how many times he'd seen his boy, and what was going on. So there was resistance to all these things, but fortunately they soon discovered that these things were a better way to serve the clients, and that we focus on outcomes rather than finance, budgets, and statistics and the like. So that I was very fortunate, having had my Boy Scout experience. One of my special interests and one of my special delights was in working with volunteers. I learned to work with volunteers. That I considered my board almost like my caseload. And my president, I considered him to be my number one case. And my job was to help them do the best possible job. And so I was constantly involved in subtle kind of training, informal training of board members and officers as to what is the best way to provide this kind of service. And I got a lot of loyal support from them. I was very fortunate. I had a whole line of very good presidents and who were very supportive of these ideas. Outstanding people, and I can start mentioning them at this point, but every one of them, with some exceptions, were very supportive. So it made it possible to do all these new and unique things, which were more expensive. They cost more money to do these things because you're investing a lot of money in professional staff. For example, when I came to work with the Jewish Big Brothers, the budget was $20,000. I remember very vividly. $8,000 was kind of for the volunteer Big Brother program, and that was paid for by the United Way. The Camp Max Straus budget was not financed by the United Way. So the board members, who love raising money, by the way, that's one of the things they like most. They like to raise money, the kind of people that we were working with. And so they raised $12,000 just to run the camp. So we had a budget of $20,000. Just the other day, I got a report from the status of things at the Jewish Big Brothers, where I kind of keep up on what they're doing. And I looked at the budget. The budget of the Jewish Big Brother Association today, obviously they're providing more service, but it's $1.5 million.
That's a little bit of a change.
That's right. $500,000 of that comes from the United Way and the Jewish Federation Council, who subsequently came into funding the agency. $1 million of it now is raised by the board of directors, fundraising and all kinds of events and the like.
They're amazing.
They're doing a very good job in funding. 2/3 of the budget now is funded by the agency itself and its fundraising. But again, there's a unique point here that I want to make. I had, budgeting and finance is an important part of any agency. Most of us as social workers are not too good in that field. And that was not one of my major interests, but I learned over the years how to do it. One of the things we discovered, I learned this in the Boy Scout. The Boy Scout said, yes, United Way is funding us. We're not going to take any government money because we don't want to get involved politically. And we want to make sure that we're not dependent totally upon the United Way. If something happens, we want to be able to have other money. So they started programs of fundraising by permission of the United Way that supplemented the United Way budget. The Jewish Big Brothers had the same concept. we started real early fundraising. We had to swim carefully in between the United Way and the Jewish Federation Council on our fundraising, but we had this philosophy that we're not going to depend entirely upon the United Way and Jewish Federation Council. And fortunately that we had that philosophy, because as of about 3 years ago, like all the United Way agencies, they received a 50% cut in the budget. All Jewish Federation Council agencies received about a 25% cut. And the government, who had been funding an awful lot of agencies, have been cutting back, so that most agencies now are in real bad straits financially because they became too dependent upon these funding agencies and the government. I know a lot about this because I'm a volunteer and have been since I left Jewish Big Brother, the United Way of the San Gabriel Valley Council, and I'm on the allocations committee, and I listen to all the stories about the agencies. If the agencies were like corporations, they'd be in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, most of them. So Jewish Big Brothers and Camp Max Straus, with the exception of some food, we did not accept or go out and get public funding for our agency. So that right now, Jewish Big Brothers is one of the few agencies that has the funds to carry on its program, even though they've had those cuts from both sources, and not need to cut back, and not need to cut staff, and not need to cut program. They're able to carry on. And that is a nice thing to know at a time like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Now, tell me, Jewish Big Brothers, when I started, and during all the time that I was there, provided Big Brothers for boys. And I understand that there are now Big Brothers for girls. How did that come about?
Well, we historically were a boys' agency. And I guess for me it was very convenient because I knew a lot about boys' agencies. I came from the Boy Scouts as the boys, and that was simple for me. I had no problem about girls and so on and so forth, but I figured that other agencies taking care of girls. But what happened was, and I did not resist it, although allegedly some people think I did resist it. I have no problem about girls. I like girls.
Good.
And
well, you have to be careful the way you say that.
Yeah, and I have a daughter, and I have granddaughters, and so on and so forth. So I have no problem. But about halfway through, or a little more than halfway through my career, we decided to bring, because it was very popular in life, we decided to bring some women on the board. There were 2 women, Beverly Savinar and Leela Cohen. They were very active in the United Way. I knew them. They were active in the Council of Jewish Women, and they were top-notch people. And so they were the first 2 women on the board. And so now we bring on more, and the board is coeducational. Then, when Stanley Gerson became director of the Volunteer Big Brother Services, he came up with the idea that girls also are fatherless, need a so-called father image. Everybody accepted that for boys, but they didn't exactly accept that for girls. And also they said, well, why don't you just send them over to the girls' organization? But we didn't have a girls' organization. We didn't have Big Sisters of Greater Los Angeles at that time. So they started a program. It was a pioneer program. It was a unique program. It was Stan's favorite program to do that. And they did it, and it turned out to be very successful. It was always a small number. Now, talking about coeducational, Camp Max Straus is for boys only for a long, long, long time. Mm-hmm. And just before I left, a year or 2 before I left, when Shel Weinstein became the camp director, Shel also, he was on our professional staff. He had a little girl assigned to him. He was a big brother to a little girl. And Shel had a lot of conviction, as did some of our people on the board. Especially when you start getting the women on the board, they said, hey, why aren't we providing camp for girls? So as of about 1984, Camp Max Straus became coeducational. 7 cabins are up on the hill, they were boys. 5 cabins down on the flats, there for girls. And we reorganized the physical plan, the physical facilities, showers and stuff all over the place to make it comfortable for girls to be in camp. So we're in the business in all of our programs now of serving both boys and girls.
So the girls and boys are at camp at the same time?
That's right.
Same sessions?
There's no problem. I wondered about that at one point.
Yeah.
I had my reservations, but I was convinced it was the right thing to do. And it's working out very successfully. And I give them a lot of credit for it.
What did you find most gratifying, personally and professionally, in all the years that you're working in agencies in the community?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I can make a broad generalization first, then might maybe give you specifics. When I look back upon my career, starting way back in 1937, I'm perhaps one of the people, and I don't think too many people can say this, who feels totally fulfilled about my career and life's experience. I was able to do what I really wanted to do, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I remember about 10 years ago, the big thing in social work was articles in the social work journals about burnout and burnout and burnout. I loved going to work every day with the Jewish Big Brothers and the Boy Scouts of America, and it was very rewarding. It met all of my professional needs as well as my ethical needs, and I have a sense of having made a difference, as is a popular way of putting it today. Made a difference, so that so many people, and I remember talking to board members. We had board members who were very, very successful people financially. Big corporation like Sidney Rosenberg, a $150 million corporation. I remember working with those people all my life. You know, a lot of them were not really happy about how they were working, what their job was, what their employment was. They had all the money in the world. They all had problems with their children because they couldn't do what they should be doing for them. They're so busy earning all that money. So that a lot of people go through life, unfortunately, I sympathize and feel for them, not really enjoying what they do.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed it. And I also feel, I guess, that I made a difference. And I've left behind some legacies that it's good to see them working out so well. I'm very proud of how the Boy Scouts are doing now, for example. The Los Angeles Area Council, about 75% of the territory and the people they serve are kids and ethnic minorities. And they're doing a very intensive job of getting ethnic minorities into the Boy Scout program. I've been on the camp committee of the Boy Scouts ever since I left Jewish Big Brothers. Ever since I left the Boy Scouts, I've been on the camp committee. I'm now currently the chairman of the campership committee. Last year, we sent 700 Boy Scouts, poor kids, black and Mexican kids mostly. We sent them to camp on campership with $140,000. Last year, the Los Angeles Times Camp Fund, which I founded as the founding president, and I've been on the board ever since. Last year, they raised and distributed $1 million and sent 10,000 kids to camp. Well, I get a great feeling when I see this is what counts me. It's not the budget, not the staff, the organization. The outcome. These are the legacies that I feel I've kind of left behind. And the Jewish Big Brothers is running better than ever. It's a better organization than when I was director of it. They're fundraising, they're programming, they're increasing. They've got 200 volunteer Big Brothers. When I was there, they only had maybe 150. They've enlarged the number of kids that go to camp. They serve about 800 kids to camp every summer. Well, these are kind of not monuments or buildings, although I built my buildings in Camp Max Straus and built a camp. But these are legacies of the people. The kids are being served. I guess I have a real sense about kids who need service getting it. One of my problems I'm having right now in my state of retirement is the state of child care services has deteriorated a great deal. And the level of poverty of children has increased a great deal. And it's somewhat disturbing, although not totally disturbing, that the state of children in America is much worse now. You know, single parents, no fathers, poverty, and so on and so forth. I had kind of thought, when I was a young graduate out of the School of Social Work in 1937, and I went to work on these problems, that by this time, those problems would be solved.
Right.
And so it's not solved.
Right.
On the other hand, there are a lot of kids who've got a lot of help as a result of our activities and our experiences. And it's very rewarding to me.
Well, what's your feeling now about measures that a social work professional can undertake now to affect programs or policies that would be more or less effective if pursued by social workers?
Well, I made reference to that earlier. I think the status of child care in this country is going downhill. And I think social work profession has to do everything it can, even though it's in a very bad climate now politically, do everything it can to try to not only just hold on to what we've done so far, but try to improve services to children by both the public agencies and the private agencies. And I'd like not to feel that funding for public agency service to children and funding for private agency service to children would decrease and we would be in real trouble, so that we have a real role. And I'm very proud of the National Association of Social Workers. I remember when I was a young social worker joining, being on committees, the local chapter of the NASW. It was a very modest, meager organization. But it has grown into a very effective, efficient, very capable organization, and politically a lot of clout and very powerful. And I would hope that they would continue to grow and continue to carry their political activity for child care services.
Very good. And what significant changes have you observed between social work practice today and the social work practice when you entered the field?
Well, that's a hard one to refer to. I think as a profession, and much due to the NASW and their various departments, there's been this great movement into clinical social work. And clinical social workers are being better trained, and they're used better, and they're being rewarded for their services much better. Social work is a great profession, and I'm very proud of it. And I think we all have a right to be very proud of our profession. I think we're much more effective than we used to be, but we're working in a very difficult culture, in a difficult environment, currently at least. So that I just think we have to I think we have to be more aggressive politically, because professionally and in terms of our training and our skills, I think we've come a long way in improving our skills through the graduate schools of social work and through the professional groups. But I think we just have to be more effective politically, because what's the use having all these skills and politically we're not allowed to use them? It's like, I remember I'd hoped someday that the Children's Bureau of the Child Welfare Department of the County of Los Angeles, I remember the days when there was nobody over there who had an MSW, and we worked so hard to get MSWs in there, hoping that they would get real professional services to the thousands and thousands of children who are being separated from their family. That's also another thing that concerns me. I remember our focus in the Jewish Big Brothers was to try to help children stay in their families, not be working on pushing them out into foster homes, orphanages, and even into Vista Del Mar. You know, our goal was to help these boys, these girls, by working with their families, help them stay in their own home, which, by and large, if all things being equal, is the best place for a kid to be. You know, because mother and dad are doing all the right thing. That was a philosophy that I brought to the Jewish Big Brothers, and we do that. And I would hope that we could get back into that thing and do more with that.
I hope you're right. Now, Well, there are some things that you neglected to talk about that you want to add at this point. Please feel free to do so.
Yes, there are several. You talked about what were some of my great satisfactions in this work. One of them was that starting in about 1947, we developed a relationship with USC's Graduate School of Social Work for field placements of 2 graduate students in the Jewish Big Brothers who wanted experience in clinical training, wanted specialization in clinical training. And this was a very helpful thing to the agency, but also the agency is very proud of the fact that many of these trainees or graduate students we hired later on to come to work for us because they'd already had a year of experience within our own agency. Also, most of them went out and worked in the field of social work, both public or private, and were very successful. And we kind of feel that this service to the community is sort of an extension, a professional extension of the Jewish Big Brothers Association. Then we also are proud of the fact that Jewish Big Brothers was responsible for organizing the 3 other Big Brother, Big Sister agencies in the community. Our board members organized the Catholic Big Brothers way back in the early days. Later on, we organized for non-Jewish, non-Catholic. There was the Big Brothers of Greater Los Angeles, which is a very successful agency, carrying on very good service. And in most recent years, we helped organize and help train the staff of the new Big Sisters of Greater Los Angeles. And the present executive director was on our staff for a while as kind of a volunteer in training. Some of our board members were also on the board of the Big Sisters of Los Angeles. And most recently, we developed a cooperative relationship with the Big Sisters of Los Angeles, wherein there are certain mothers who wanted their girls, their daughters, to have big sisters. Into this tape, I was talking about the 3 other Big Brother, Big Sister agencies that the Jewish Big Brothers helped start. And the last one I was talking about was the Big Sisters of Greater Los Angeles, which is a very successful agency, doing very well. Some of our board members are on their board. And that we now have an arrangement with them where Jewish girls who are related to our agency through their brothers and mothers can be provided with Big Sisters by the Big Sisters of Greater Los Angeles. And we now have about 15 or 20 of them. Also, I'd like to speak about another area that grew out of my Boy Scout camping and professional responsibilities and my experience as administrator of Camp Max Straus through the Jewish Big Brothers. Having these professional responsibilities for camping in both agencies, I became active at the very early stages when I came to the Boy Scout LA Council, because a man named Wes Klusman was very active in the American Camping Association and involved me in that organization. And I've been involved in the American Camping Association with the local chapter, Southern California Camping Association, and to the national organization. Through the Welfare Planning Council, I became chairman of the first camp committee of the Welfare Planning Council. Later became the general manager of the first national meeting of the American Camping Association held in Los Angeles. As a result of that national meeting here in Los Angeles, we prevailed upon the Welfare Planning Council through its director of research, Genevieve Carter, and her assistant, whose name slips at me at the moment, to make a self-study of all the camps and the campers in the greater Los Angeles area. This took about 2 years, and came up with a very excellent report that became the basis of establishing within the Welfare Planning Council a Camp Bureau with a professional social worker as director of the Camp Bureau to implement the recommendations of that Camp Bureau. This led to the establishment of the Times Campership Fund about 41 years ago, where the Los Angeles Times, the United Way, and the Southern California Camping Association jointly carried on, and now have been carrying on for 41 years, a very successful and unique in the whole country campership program to send, again, minority kids, basically poor kids, to about 120 different camps in Southern California who meet the requirements of the standards of the American Camping Association. Last year, as I said previously, 10,000 kids went to camp as a result of that program. So I have a long history of identification with the American Camping Association, both locally and nationally. At one time I was the secretary of the American Camping Association, and a couple of years later I was the vice president of the American Camping Association, representing the not-for-profit social agencies, because the American Camping Association also includes private camps that are for-profit camps. This has been a very rewarding experience, and also a great learning experience participating in these national conferences. I would like to kind of also make brief reference to something that I should have included when I talked about my professional scouting experience. You remember I indicated that I've been active as a volunteer since I retired from the Jewish Big Brothers. But while I was working with the Jewish Big Brothers, I was invited by the then executive director of the Los Angeles Area Council of Boy Scouts to organize and chair the first committee on scouting for the handicapped. Now they call it Scouts with Disabilities. I agreed to do that because I've had this experience working with handicapped kids at Camp Max Straus, and felt that was a wonderful opportunity. Scouting is a great opportunity for handicapped kids to build their self-esteem, to be part of a regular group, and not to be isolated. And so one condition I had on taking that job, I always have conditions when I take a job, was that they would provide me with a professional who would do nothing but work on this scouting for handicap. And they did. A very capable young man. And he busied himself for several years organizing scout troops in all the schools where there are handicapped kids, special school, or kids are in special service classes and so on. And we also focused on trying to get handicapped kids who could handle it to be mainstreamed into the regular scouting thing. So that was a very rewarding and satisfying experience for me, as a result of which I was invited to be a member of the National Council of Boy Scouts of America and to be on their committee on scouting for the handicapped. Subsequently, I became the vice chairman of that committee, and that committee enlarged the whole focus of getting Boy Scouts all over America, from all the councils, into the Boy Scout movement. And statistically, there are large numbers of kids that are in the program. All kinds of kids. Kids who are physically handicapped, blind, deaf, spastic, kids who are mentally handicapped, disabled kids, learning disabled kids, kids who are in juvenile delinquency institutions and the like. So that was kind of that's been another one of those great experiences. But it fits in very well to my early experience in the Boy Scouts, working with the Boy Scouts, and working with Jewish Big Brothers. Finally, I'd like to talk about the outcomes. I've always been oriented to, I was busy with all process and organization. I'm a good organizational person. And I've learned management and executive directorship and know how to do all those things. Got a lot of training in that field. But then I've always been interested in so-called outcome. What happened to these kids that went through our program, our camp program, our volunteer Big Brother program, our parent-child counseling program? Where are they now? We've been through this now for about 55, almost 60 years. Where are they? They're in the community here. And it's very, and I use the word rewarding, I'm overdoing it, but it's very rewarding to find that these kids are out in the community in the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, successful in all kinds of places and ways. And we run into them from time to time, and they always remember their experience at Camp Max Straus. I've heard them say to me often, the best week I had in my whole life as a kid was that I went to Camp Max Straus, or my big brother did this and this and this for me. So we can feel the outcomes of the program. And one of the best outcomes in a way is this. On our board of directors of the Jewish Big Brothers, we brought into members of the board former counselors, people who worked at our campus, college students. For example, there's Marv Rosenberg, who became chairman of our camp committee, went to UCLA, was a student. There was Dave Schwartz, who was a physical education person at Roosevelt High School. He came to work for us as a young teacher. Later became president of the Jewish Big Brothers Association. And then we have board members currently who were former clients of the agency. And I won't mention their names. And to top it all, we have what is the final chapter in this whole thing of outcome. Our current president of the Jewish Big Brothers Association is a young man named Bob Waldorf, who incidentally was supervised when he was a little brother by Ben Cohen. Bob Waldorf, his mother was a client in our agency. He was a small boy. He had a big brother assigned to him, who still is related to him. It's a lifelong relationship. He went to Camp Max Straus. I remember him very vividly at Camp Max Straus. He was a very active boy. He became a volunteer big brother. He became a member of the board. And last year, he was elected to be president of the Jewish Big Brothers Association. So here you are. You talk of outcomes. Those are the things that are the living things. It's not the budget, it's not the staff, it's not the, all this stuff. It's what happens to people.
I agree completely.
There are two other people that I'd like to make reference to. It's an afterthought. But, I remember a young man, and I will not mention his name, but his first name, Harry, is now a senior federal judge, next step below being a Supreme Court judge, and is deeply involved in the community and helping the Salvation Army and a lot of other projects, and is on our advisory board. I remember when Harry was a young boy, and I remember vividly some of the real difficult problems he had. So he ends up being a federal judge. Mm-hmm. Then I remember another young man, whose also name was Harry, who worked in the kitchen. He was a client of ours, but then worked in the kitchen. By the way, Judge Harry also worked at camp. Worked in the kitchen, became a counselor. They helped him go through law school by working summers, so on and so forth. Then this other person is Harry Handler, who worked in the kitchen, and later on became a counselor, helped work his way through college. Harry Handler, for many years, was the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, of course, I'm mentioning people who are in the service sector. I guess I could mention people who are very, very wealthy, very rich, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's kind of a way in which my closing statement is talking about these people.
That's great, Milt. It's great to hear. Now, I have one other question. Do you have any personal papers, pamphlets, or items that can be made available to researchers and other scholars, and that you're willing to contribute to our Social Welfare Archives project?
Well, the Jewish Big Brothers Association has in their files a whole series of annual bound books of the minutes and all the activities of the agency. They might be available someday when they finish up with what they're doing now. The last 2 years they've been involved in doing oral histories of some of the people who've made contributions, and they're in process of putting all of that together. Perhaps when that's all finished up, we might approach them and see if they'd like to store those in our archives. Now, in the Boy Scout thing, I had suggested on several occasions to the Boy Scouts about getting together a committee and doing a history of the Boy Scouts. They haven't done that yet. I myself have dictated an oral history of my experience with the Boy Scouts over the past 50, 60 years. But it's a very personal kind of thing. We might want to approach the Boy Scouts again because they've been in business since about 1920, a long, long time. And maybe get them to do something about their oral history. I'd be glad to participate in that. But other than that, I've cleaned my files out and
Okay.
busy throwing all my papers away.
Well, Mel, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I think this is an important addition to our oral histories. And thank you very much.
Well, it's a little different approach. It's kind of a group work approach, and it's a private agency approach. And as you say, nobody thinks of the Boy Scouts as a social welfare
Right,
agency, but
right.
it's a tremendous social welfare agency. Right. I enjoyed it and appreciate your doing it, Ben, taking the time.